May the words of my mouth and the thoughts and reflections of all of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Please be seated. As many of you know, my father passed away. My father Douglas passed away recently. He was 98 years old, and for a decade he had had dementia. It was fairly moderate at first, although it was serious enough that we took the car off him and he was no longer able to work and he was no longer able to play golf. When he was playing golf, he used to have this little thing on his wrist to help him count how many strokes he'd had. But when he got to the stage where he was playing some par 5 holes and he looked down and he told them he just had a 2, they began to wonder. He'd forgotten to click the counter. So that was Dad for the last 10 years of his life, but in more recent years, in order to keep him at home and to surround him with people who could answer his questions and stay his confusion, we organised for the family to be with him for 24/7, and we did that for the last 3.5 years, and I played a small part in that. Now, I know that many of you have lost loved ones, and we all process our grief in different ways. One of the ways in which I've processed Dad's passing is to write things down. I needed to write things down because we had a simple, small family ceremony, a funeral. But more than that, once I started, I couldn't stop. And probably in the last couple of weeks, I've written between 20 and 25,000 words, attempting to give some sort of shape to Dad's life, and then sharing what I'd written, sharing with my siblings, sharing with my own kids, sharing with Annette, sharing with my niece, actually sharing with anybody who'd lend me an ear and listen. And then Matt goes in the middle of all of this, and Matt goes and sets Luke's Gospel for us to reflect upon during this Advent season. And how does Luke's Gospel begin? It begins like this. Many have attempted to draw up an account of the things that have been fulfilled amongst us in the life of Jesus. And now, says Luke, it's my turn. It seemed good to me, most excellent Theophilus, for me to attempt to write an orderly account. So here I am, attempting to record, to wrap words around some of the things that my dad said and did, his outlook on life, what mattered to him. There's 98 years of life to wrap words around, a lot of stories to be told, a lot of details to be checked for accuracy, many memories that I'm seeking to preserve, trying to give some sort of coherence to the story of his life. I'm doing that, and I'm also reading Luke's Gospel. And here's similar task, albeit with a much more significant life story to tell. How much more would you want to write down and preserve and pass on to future generations the things that Jesus said and did amongst us, all that took place between his birth and death? So again, there I am, feeling a little bit insufficient for my task, fumbling my way towards some sort of coherent, meaningful account of my dad's life. And I felt for Luke. And I think for the first time I sensed the enormity of the task that was before him and how he must have felt. He must have felt this: I'm insufficient for this. What justice can I do to this incredible life story that I'm seeking to record? He must have felt a little bit ridiculous, I think. I wonder if he sensed himself and needed to sense himself guided by God in the task before him. But certainly I reckon there must have been a little bit of, here it is, Theophilus, here it is, folks, the best I can do, go easy on me. My best attempt, and I use the word attempt advisedly, to capture what is of significance, what is worth preserving in the life of Jesus. And so he begins. Well, how does he begin? How does he begin? Well, we heard it read. Alison read it so beautifully for us. He begins with the story of a birth foretold. but it's not the one that we would have expected. Elizabeth and Zechariah are old, well along in years, is the delightful phrase that I read in one version of the Bible. And they have no children, but it's evident that they've longed for children and they've prayed for children, they've prayed and they've prayed and they've prayed for children. And an angel, a messenger of God, appears to Zechariah and tells him, your prayers have been heard. Elizabeth will give birth to a child, to a son. The son will be a joy and a delight to you, and not just you. Many will rejoice because of his birth. His name will be John, and he will bring many back to the Lord their God. Zechariah is left speechless. Elizabeth conceives and becomes heavy with child. That's the thrust of the story. That's how Luke chose to begin his account of the life of Jesus. That's how he chose to begin the story he would tell, seeking to preserve what was of value in the things that Jesus said and did, seeking to write a coherent account that future generations like us, could benefit from. And he begins in an interesting way, I suppose, but why like this, with this elderly couple, with the story of John's birth foretold, the birth of John the Baptist. Mark's Gospel, that retelling of the Jesus story, that attempt, cuts to the chase. You open it up, you read chapter 1, and you're not more than 9 verses down the track, and we already have the fully formed adult Jesus moving here, moving there, being baptized in the River Jordan. In Mark's Gospel, there's no birth that's foretold. Indeed, there's no birth story, not for John, not for Jesus, no trip to Bethlehem, no manger, no mention of Elizabeth and Zechariah. Mark's Gospel, in comparison to Luke's, is very stripped back. So what is Luke doing? Well, I think I get what he's doing. And I guess I get it because of what I've been doing in recent weeks. Some of the words I've written about my dad involved trying to see him in his context. His early adult years were they were the Menzies era. And I know that Menzies had a big influence on my dad. His teenage years were the years of World War II. And he signed up when he turned 18 and joined the Air Force, and they impacted him in a significant way. And his boyhood was spent during the years of the Great Depression and some of the things that he was forced to do, or he did, in order to make ends meet for his family, and the sort of attitudes that he had to possessions and wealth. He was shaped by that period in time. He was shaped by his parents, his grandparents, maybe even his great-grandparents, Patrick and Sarah Ware, who came out from Ireland as assisted migrants and arrived in Sydney in 1841. What's Luke doing with this story of Elizabeth and Zechariah and John's birth foretold? And in a moment we're going to find out that Elizabeth is related to Mary. Well, I think Luke is wanting to make clear that the story of Jesus needs to be understood in that much larger context. It's not to be taken in isolation from all that's gone before. Jesus didn't just appear out of the blue. There's a context, an historical, a cultural, a spiritual context. His story is part of a much bigger story, a story that stretches all the way back to Abraham and Sarah, and surely there are echoes in what we heard today of that ancient couple, that elderly couple, their childlessness, their being promised a child, a son. And so too the description of what John will say and do, which is that he'll bring many back to the Lord their God in the spirit and power of Elijah. He will change hearts and prepare a way of the Lord, for the Lord. And all of this is, well, there are distinct echoes of the prophets of old. John's call to a task that is in continuity with all those Old Testament prophets. It's as though Luke is saying, something new is happening. I'm about to tell you this story of all that Jesus said and did, of all that was fulfilled amongst us. Something new has just arrived. But it's something that has long been hoped for. Ancient promises are about to be answered. The purposes of God are at last about to be fulfilled. Prayers are about to be realised. The waiting is now at an end in the story of Jesus that I'm about to unfold. And so here we are at the start of Advent, the first Sunday in Advent. Actually, the first Sunday in the new church year. And we stand poised, waiting, looking forward to another retelling of the story of Jesus. And we'll hear it across the year as we pass through Christmas and we pass through Easter in the year ahead. That's what we circle around week by week here at church. The story of Jesus, retelling that, unfolding that again and again and again. A lesson from today is this, that we should never be surprised if from time to time we go back into the Old Testament, back to the law and the prophets, to understand Jesus in his larger context, to get the bigger story. But my prayer for today, well, here we are, first Sunday in Advent. It's often associated with hope. People light a candle, an Advent candle, a hope candle this Sunday, a peace candle next Sunday. That's the theme of the second Sunday in Advent. A joy candle, and then a love candle. My prayer for today, and I was encouraged by Matt's words last week, and if you get a chance, please listen to his sermon, it's a beauty. Matt said that the journey of a person back to God may be simpler than we think, may be more straightforward than we imagine. It might be shorter than we expect. And so my prayer takes up the words spoken about John in our reading today. He will bring many back to the Lord. So may, in this season of Advent, and in the new church year ahead of us, may we see many turn back to the Lord their God. May we turn back where we need to turn back. And may we, in God's mercy and grace, be instrumental in helping others to do the same. Amen.